The Cincinnati Bengals got big-time deals done with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but it's still not enough. We'll discuss on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready. Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome into the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert Lauren Cox. On today's episode, we're going to talk about a potential alternate path the Steelers could take at quarterback. We got a big-time market-setting deal for Derek Stingley at cornerback. What does it mean for the Houston Texans? But we'll start with the Cincinnati Bengals extensions finally getting done. Before we get into them, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. But Lauren, it happened late in the night, something that I thought might happen when I recorded my show on Sunday for Monday morning. So I'm sure that was interesting to hear on Monday morning, knowing the extensions happened. But we get the news, both Jamar Chase and T. Higgins signed. What was your initial reaction?
I mean, it's a lot of money to invest in one position, but this is what Cincinnati set themselves up for with the double franchise tag. This is they buried themselves in this hole, so they got to go forward in it.
Yeah, 100%. That's where they're at. And this is, obviously something that we've been talking about for a while with the Bengals, for years with the Bengals, with these two players, but they finally get the deal done. And my guy James from Locked On Bengals says Bengals fans should celebrate.
It's huge. It's huge news. It's huge to see the Bengals break precedent in a few different ways. There are a lot of layers to this. And I will say this. I would say for the majority of T. Higgins' Bengals tenure, it didn't feel like he would get the second contract in Cincinnati. And whether it was Jamar, whether it was his agent, and by Jamar, I mean just having such an elite wide receiver on the roster. Like, you knew the Bengals were paying Jamar like 6 games into his rookie contract. You're like, oh, well, yeah, he's going to be here for a long time. And with T, it was like, can they keep them together? And that was a conversation years ago. I mean, year 2 and year 3 of T. Higgins, where it's like, all right, well, what are they going to do? And then you had everything play out the way it did. And for it to end up here now, where it's Joe, it's Jamar, it's T. Jamar's under contract for the next 5 years, T. Higgins the next 4 years. You have this trio together for the next at least 4 years for the rest of, I would say, their prime. It's a hell of a day. It's a hell of a night for the Cincinnati Bengals.
I mean, that's one way to put it. They get this done. They've been talking about it forever. Now they can move on. But Lauren, to me, what this feels like is your buddy wrecked his car and then wants you to congratulate him for rebuilding it. Like he fixed it back up. It's back to normal. Great job, pal. But you're the one who wrecked it in the first place. So the Bengals solved this problem and they finally put this to bed. But it only became such an issue because of their inactivity and them dragging their feet. They could have had this for a way better rate. Maybe not on T. Higgins, who I thought probably could have gotten more money, but I guess that's why he changed agents, because no agent is going to willingly give themselves less money on behalf of a player, right? So he changes agents, gets Jamar Chase's agent so they can negotiate their deals together. Like, I'm glad the Bengals got it done, but they created this problem, and they still have a car that has been wrecked already once and is worth less than it was before, even though it's been fixed up. So, I don't want to congratulate the Bengals too much for plugging a hole in a boat that they created.
Yeah, I mean, it's a necessary evil at that point, but I still want to see what they do with the rest of the boat, right? Okay, they created a hole in this boat. The boat has some other holes in it as well, and everyone's looking around going, this defense is going to be terrible, and the Bengals are going to go down. Like, maybe, probably, but hey, it's only March 17th. There's a lot of offseason left to see. Okay, yeah, they paid these guys. Let's see what else they're able to do and where they can find some money and where they can maybe make some moves. They end up trading Trey Hendrickson, they get the right pieces back, and then you can start to build something together here. Like, I'm willing to give them some patience, but also agree that, okay, this isn't a move that gets them any farther than they were. This just keeps them at least where they were.
Yeah, and look, to be more optimistic about it for the Bengals, one thing I can say is finally getting this done does allow them to proceed forward. You know, there's clarity, and whether it's good or bad or indifferent, clarity can be a great thing. And I think the Bengals now know what their financial situation is going to be, what their cash spend is going to be, how it affects the salary cap, and how they can manage that. And with these extensions, it's going to help the Bengals with the salary cap, and they're going to be able to maneuver the contract the way they need to create salary cap space to do really whatever they feel they need to do. But they absolutely need to do something, because the reality is, like you were just saying, I mean, they bring these players back, but these are players that they had before. The Bengals don't just need to hold the tide. The Bengals needed to get better, and they have not gotten better, in my opinion. But now, having the clarity that they have with these two contracts being done, and hopefully the Trey Hendrickson situation getting ironed out within the next week, they'll have the clarity they need to begin building the team up to be more than what it was, because this team was a major disappointment last year. So just status quo, bringing back the players you had last year, is simply not going to be good enough.
To your point, like you say, like, now they have the clarity, now they can move forward. What were they waiting for so long? Like, free agent negotiations started a week ago. Like, what, now you can start making the moves? Like, I know they've signed a couple players and stuff. It's not that they haven't been doing anything, but at the same time, there was no reason that any of this had to take this long with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Like, there was always nothing changed yesterday to today that all of a sudden, oh, now the deal can get done because the Bengals decided they were willing to meet these terms and the deal is done. And they're the ones who are paying for the consequences of their own delay.
Yeah, 100%. One thing that I think does need to be taken into account here is you can pay multiple players big time money. Like, we've seen teams do it. That's a real thing. You can do it. You can manage the contracts however you need. But when you get into that realm, which is where the Bengals are now, you have to win in the draft. And just recently, you know, they draft Jermaine Burton, which has been an absolute disaster. Miles Murphy in the first round, Dax Hill in the first round. Like, the Bengals have not drafted anywhere near as well as they will need to if they hope to reach the heights that they had reached before, making it to a Super Bowl, being a real contender in the AFC. Because you've paid this money the way that you have, you better hit in the draft. And I just don't know that I have faith for the Bengals organization to be able to do that.
And it's not like they have some like treasure trove of draft picks sitting there. They've got their own, first through six. They got 6 picks. It's all their own picks. Like, that's a normal amount of draft picks. But man, it just feels like they need so much more than that. And not that they would be, quote unquote, better off had they traded T. Higgins and gotten draft picks for it. But right, that's why that was such a real consideration there, right? Like, could you put so much more into the defense if you weren't putting so much into 2 wide receivers? Could you pay Trey Hendrickson instead of T. Higgins and then spread the love a little bit more, instead of all the memes about how every Bengals game this year is going to be a final score of 90-77?
Yeah. And where do we go from here? If the Bengals don't make the playoffs again, and then we get into the next season, like, where does this end up with the way that they've done this? It'll be interesting to watch it play out. But either way, that big time trio is staying in Cincinnati, and Joe Burrow is a happy man along with his wide receivers. But with that being said, another person who's very, very happy is Derek Stingley Jr., who got the biggest cornerback contract in NFL history. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. March Madness is here, folks, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories to who's going to cut down the nets. Me personally, I know that it can be a bit boring, but I like to go chalk in the NCAA tournament. And I can do that with spreads, totals, game props, and bet on all the big favorites. I can stay in the action all tournament long, and the FanDuel app is simple to use. And when I win, I get paid instantly. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. That's FanDuel.com. All right, Lauren, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talked about the Cincinnati Bengals getting both extensions done. T. Higgins and Jamar Chase back in Cincinnati. But now we got to talk about another big-time deal that happened on Thursday. The Houston Texans make Derek Stingley Jr. the highest-paid cornerback in the NFL. Another market reset at a big-time position this offseason. Our guys over at Locked On Texans talked about just how good Derek Stingley Jr. is.
I watched Deion Sanders. I've watched Richard Sherman. I've watched Revis Island. I've watched some of the best when it comes to playing that cornerback position. John, he's one. He's one of them. I am not afraid to say
it's a name you didn't say that he really reminds me of, because I believe that not only can he take your receiver out the game, but he can get those interceptions. And I think he reminds me
from the Cowboys.
Thank y'all for watching Locked On. But he reminds me so much of Champ Bailey.
Ooh, yes.
You know, Champ will take your receiver out the game, but every now and then they want to try him.
Yes.
And for 2 or 3 years stretch before it was Revis Island, this is early 2000, Champ was taking it out the air. And
so Derek Stingley Jr., 3-year extension, $90 million, $89 million of that is guaranteed. So it's basically a fully guaranteed deal, as close as you can get. My question is, why is that last million not guaranteed? What are we doing here?
Well, you got to protect yourself from saying another fully guaranteed contract. You don't want to be the one who sets the precedent for that on the defensive side of the ball.
Right.
Just recreate the Kirk Cousins offer there. But man, it's a big jump from the last highest paid corner was getting what I think $25 million a year. Now we jump up to 30. I got to give a lot of props to Stingley's agent, because the way I bet they negotiated that is not what the dollar amount was, but percentage of salary cap when the player was signed. Because when some of the other previous cornerback contracts were handed out, like Jair Alexander and a couple others, they got about 10% of what the salary cap was, and 30 million is about 10% of where the salary cap is now for the NFL. So he's just getting it by a percentage, and it looks like the dollar amount goes up a bunch when really it's just a slight increase on the percentage, and that's just salary cap inflation for you.
Yeah, the Texans have had a weird offseason to me. They trade Laramie Tunsil, which is just an incredibly interesting decision to make. They then trade for Christian Kirk, and they trade for C.J. Gardner-Johnson as well. It's just very confusing to me that they've made some of these trades for these veterans at the same time, trading out Laramie Tunsil. The offensive line struggled so much last offseason, and they made the offensive line worse. But I do like that they've just taken a little bit of a step back, in my opinion. Last year, they go out to get Danielle Hunter. They make the big trade for Stephon Diggs. Like, they're doing a lot of high-profile moves. And while they made it to the playoffs, the Houston Texans season, and they won a playoff game, the Houston Texans season was a bit of a disappointment. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but they fire the offensive coordinator, and it just, things feel a little rockier in Houston than maybe it would feel like just looking at their record. For them to not be crazy this offseason and just kind of take their medicine and sign a bunch of small one-year deals with guys like, Braxton Berrios and Ed Ingram, bringing in Darrell Taylor and stuff like that. I just like that they're kind of taking a deep breath, taking a step back. Hey, we got to fix some things internally before we go out and make huge moves on the outside. I think that's probably the right way to handle it.
Well, and I think there's some contrast here to we just talked about with the Cincinnati Bengals, for like another team that needed, they were disappointed last year as well, and they're kind of just rolling with the status quo. Houston at least is changing things. We might not necessarily agree with all of the changes, and there's still time to see what else they're going to do, but at least they said, hey, 10-7, first place in the division and a playoff win, still not good enough because this team isn't where we wanted to be or where we thought we needed to be. So let's at least do something different, so we're not just trying the same thing again, hoping for different results.
Yeah, they're not being complacent, and I think they deserve to be applauded for that, even if each individual decision has its own level of merit and everything like that. But do want to look at how this will impact the rest of the NFL, because like you said, big jump from the last cornerback contract that we saw. And now we know that Sauce Gardner is going to be looking at this and saying, hey, I'm just as good, if not better, than Derek Stingley Jr. I've been better for longer. I want more than he got. If you're the Jets, are you paying that to Sauce Gardner?
I think you have to, right? Like, that's the advantage that the Texans got of going first. But now Sauce Gardner looks at that and says, well, whatever we were negotiating before, well, sorry, now we're negotiating off of that. I mean, the guarantees is going to be the interesting part there, right? Because not only is it a huge bump in salary, but also a huge bump in guarantees where you could say, okay, well, maybe we'll give you more than $30 million a year, but less total guarantees, or maybe we'll give you a similar amount of guarantees, but a little less than $30 million a year. Like, you can find a way to sort of massage this in a spot that fits better for the Jets. And it's tough for them right now with the lingering Aaron Rodgers dead money still looming over them. But, year 2 and 3 into whatever deal he gets should make that a little bit more affordable on their salary cap.
And the reality is the salary cap is going to go up more again. It's gone up so much in the last few years. It's going to keep going up. The Jets absolutely have to lock down Sauce Gardner and make sure that he doesn't go anywhere. That would be the right move there. But, in their position, you're right. You got the Aaron Rodgers dead money, but with Justin Fields at quarterback, the question is, regardless of whether they sign Sauce Gardner anytime soon before the season or what they do with that, the Jets are in a precarious situation this year. I don't know. I feel like they have talent on the roster, but with Aaron Glenn coming in as a first-year head coach and then Justin Fields as a very low-end starter in the NFL, in my opinion, if he is even one of the top 32, I just don't have very high expectations for the Jets, but that might be exactly what they need.
Yeah, and I think they're in a good position where it's like they're not this team that had to put a bunch of different money into a bunch of great defensive players. Like, they gave Quinnen Williams a pretty big contract, and Jamie Sherwood, their linebacker, got a bigger deal, but they've got the room right now to absorb, a bigger Sauce Gardner contract and say, this is a cornerstone piece of our franchise, and we can afford to keep paying him and have that be one of those pieces that gets us closer as we, maybe retool a little bit on the fly to try and get back to that spot, but you need him locked in throughout that process.
If Aaron Rodgers goes to the New York Giants, who wins more games next year, the Giants or the Jets?
Gosh, it's so hard to know what Aaron Glenn's offensive coaching staff, how well that's going to work out and translate over here. It could be great with Fields, but it's tough to say Rodgers versus Fields and not lean Rodgers there, but they may have a better team around Fields in New York. So, or they're both in New York, yes, but with the Jets. So right. The Giants feel like too much of a disaster to go there. So I guess I'll go Jets, but I don't feel great about either one.
Honestly, I'll just go Giants because, Malik Neighbors and Aaron Rodgers, and if Andrew Thomas comes, if the Giants are healthy, I think that their roster is a little bit better. And then, I'll take Rodgers a little bit over Fields. It would be so close. I don't know if they play next year, but I would absolutely love that. But I think I'll go Giants by just a little bit, but I get the argument for the Jets.
What if Tyrod Taylor takes over in week 9? Then who you got? Changes the equation a little bit there, doesn't it?
It does just a little bit. You're not wrong about that. But a lot of offseason left, a lot of moves to make. And as a matter of fact, we don't even know what team Aaron Rodgers is going to be playing for. So it's our daily Aaron Rodgers Panda Watch on Locked On NFL.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, Lauren, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talked Bengals extensions, Derek Stingley and his impact on the cornerback market. Now, of course, we got to check in on Aaron Rodgers because there's still no decision with Aaron Rodgers and where he's going to go next. So at this stage, it does make you wonder, should these teams just move on from Aaron Rodgers? Should they even be waiting? If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, why are you waiting on Aaron Rodgers? If you're Russell Wilson, why are you waiting on Aaron Rodgers? Do you think, and now we're hearing the Giants are scheduling meetings with Joe Flacco and Jameis Winston, would you move on, or is Aaron Rodgers good enough for you if you're the Jets or if you're the Giants or the Steelers to actually wait for him to make up his mind when you have no idea when that might be?
Yeah, I feel like at this point, there's no reason to be in a rush because what's your alternative option before the NFL draft, right? It's well, we don't want to wait for Aaron Rodgers. So, is Russell Wilson, is that your only, that's plan B? I don't know. You might as well wait. I mean, if you're Pittsburgh, you've had the time to get Russell Wilson this whole time. You know what you're getting or not getting with Russell Wilson in that regard. So I don't see why, like, especially if it's the same 2 or 3 teams that all need quarterbacks and they're all waiting for Aaron Rodgers. It's not like, well, you're waiting for Aaron. Someone is going to go take your plan because you're also waiting for Aaron Rodgers. So, like, I get it. If it's draft day and Rodgers still hasn't signed, and you're like, well, are we going to take a quarterback? Like, you got to move on without him. But he has some of the leverage in this regard because there's not much of the supply to match the demand for quarterback.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy to think about with all the veterans that we thought would be available, but Derek Carr not being available, Kirk Cousins not being available, and then the draft, maybe people aren't as high on Sanders as maybe we initially thought. Like, there aren't as many options as maybe we thought there would be. But speaking of that, I had a crazy idea, Lauren. If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you could go out and get Aaron Rodgers. You could do that. You could. But what if you called up the Indianapolis Colts and you said, what would we have to pay to get Anthony Richardson? Do you think if the Steelers gave a second-round pick in this year's draft and a second-round pick in next year's draft, that they could get Anthony Richardson from the Indianapolis Colts?
I think they could, but is that the best use of those draft picks for where they are right now? Like, Anthony Richardson is, a bit of a project still, right? You don't know exactly what you're getting there. And imagine if you took those 2 second-round picks and combined them with your first-round pick this year to move up in the draft. Like, would you rather use those couple picks to go up and get a rookie quarterback that's going to be younger and have more of a runway of like, hey, we got time to build up this quarterback, as opposed to Anthony Richardson is getting farther and farther in his rookie contract where the timer is just like accelerated there. Like, two second-round picks is a lot for a flyer on a guy that you might still have a lot of potential and believe in, but is getting older and is just as big of a question mark as a lot of other young quarterbacks you could go after.
I understand. I don't know. Something about it makes me feel like Mike Tomlin could get the best out of him. And look, Pittsburgh going with Aaron Rodgers, you're selling Aaron Rodgers to the fan base. I think saying, hey, we didn't get Rodgers, but we got a quarterback that we're going to try to develop. They were going to go back to Justin Fields. They wanted Justin Fields back. And to me, Anthony Richardson is just maybe not better, but a better option than Justin Fields with similar issues and similar traits. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it's just a better bet to go with Anthony Richardson there. So I guess we could talk about what compensation would be fair in a move like that and whether Indianapolis would be willing. But I think the fit in terms of player with stable organization and player with strong head coach, I just think that would be a great opportunity for Anthony Richardson to repair his career.
I think the thing that I get hung up on there is, like, Mike Tomlin has always been very much like, hey, like, let's take care of the football and lean on our running game and defense. And obviously Richardson would be a big help in the running game, but like the turnovers from last season doesn't necessarily feel like the style of quarterbacking and some of the recklessness in that regard that Tomlin preferably likes. Because I think they look at that team and say, listen, like, we've got a couple good wide receivers. We don't necessarily need you to be throwing 80-yard moon balls. Like, just get the ball in their hands and we can make it work with, they have made it work with quarterbacks that aren't going to go crazy in that regard, but just kind of keep things simple. And Richardson has not been a keep things simple quarterback. It feels like all or nothing in that regard, that, yeah, he can set it deep and you want to use those guys vertically, but at the same time, you want to take care of the ball when you do so. And I think that's where both Fields and Wilson were a little bit more adept at fitting that style where they can go deep, but they're not going to just chuck it with YOLO balls all game.
Yeah, it would make for interesting position for the Steelers, because that may not be what they're looking for, like you said, but also I just think it can work. But the alternative, again, is Aaron Rodgers. And my guy Chris Carter from Locked On Steelers talked about that again.
But there's continued reports that are coming out about multiple directions. And the bottom line here that I'm trying to tell you guys, nobody really knows what's actually going to happen. Why? Because a lot of this just still comes down to Aaron Rodgers. The Steelers appear to be waiting for Aaron Rodgers, just like the Giants appear to be waiting for Aaron Rodgers. But also now the Vikings are in this equation somehow. And there's also a report out there from The Athletic that Aaron Rodgers could really be waiting on just to see if he can just join the Vikings, and if the Vikings don't give him an offer that he wants, he will just retire. Whatever he decides at that point, who knows? This limbo is going to continue for however long teams let it, or he lets it, whatever. But this waiting period, this just makes me think that whatever salary the Steelers offered him isn't really that high or what he thinks he's worth. Otherwise, he would be going through with it probably right now.
I mean, that's 100% right. I just think this is a game for Rodgers. He enjoys the attention. He enjoys dragging things out and having everybody wait on him. And that's why I guess I was just scheming up alternate routes for the Steelers, because I just think it's insane that they're letting their whole all season stall and pause for Rodgers.
Yeah, it's tricky because like he's still Aaron Rodgers. Like maybe he's not the Aaron Rodgers that he once was, but like it's Aaron Rodgers at the end of the day. I know like the level of play we've seen the last couple of seasons is not that guy, but you know how NFL coaches are. It's like, oh, you give me Aaron Rodgers, I will get much more than the Jets did.
Right.
I mean, they had Nathaniel Hackett and those idiots over there. You know, those guys were bums. I'm Arthur Smith, or I'm Brian Dable. I can work with a future Hall of Fame quarterback and be great. Like it's worth it to me, the hypothetical offensive minded coach here who thinks they can make this happen. You can understand why they would all fall in love with Rodgers and be willing to say, you know what, we can wait a couple weeks. And it's not like it's costing us our whole offseason right now. We've already missed on all the other quarterback options. It's Rodgers or Wilson, and we already know what Wilson is. So we might as well wait and see what comes there. And then we can still do everything else we want to do with the team around that and move things forward.
You know, I think it's funny that all the coaches say it's the Jimmies and the Joes, not the X's and the O's. But then they also say, oh, well, I can coach him up. Well, all right, then. It's funny how it can be both at the same time. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On NFL. Again, I am your host, the Madman Tyler Rowland, for my co-host, Lauren Cox. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe out there.